Hey everybody, it's Andy. Quick little intro to the video before the intro starts. First off, happy 2025. It's already very weird. Obviously, it's February. We had recorded this in January, but weirdness prevails. And one of the things that I'm struggling with as the producer of this show, and I'll be upfront and say, I want to keep doing this. All four of us want to keep doing this. We're going to keep doing this because, as we've said so many times, it's mostly for us, and you 7 people around the world. But one of the things that is hardest about this is doing a 4-camera talking head show and the amount of time that it takes to edit it. Now, obviously, if you've been watching and been with us for a while, this program, this podcast started out very different. It was very flashy. It had lots of moving things and everything. And of course, over the course of the last couple of years, that's dialed down. And that's because it takes an immense amount of time to do that kind of production. As much as I might like how it looks, as much as how you guys think it looks, really, I understand, and I have grown to understand even more that y'all are here because of conversation and the personality, not necessarily due to the watchability. So what we're doing here today is a new thing. We are back on a podcasting platform that has implemented over the time I've been away a number of AI features that really relieve people like me of the editing toil. I don't know what this looks like. I'm kind of flying by the seat of my whatever here, and I'm just letting this be what it is. I'm doing a few tiny little things, doing some drops or throw to break and stuff like that. But for the most part, all the camera switching and everything that you see is artificial intelligence. The other thing that is going to be on the screen, and not now, but later down here, is I'm letting the auto-generated transcript show up on screen. It might be valuable, might not be valuable. You might see it again. You might never see it again. Don't know. So this is kind of a grand experiment. And we'll see how it goes. But I want to tell you all that we are in a very strange time for the 4 of us and everybody. And really, just from everybody here at Keep Your Hat On, we encourage you to maybe just be a little bit extra kind. I personally don't give a crap what side of the aisle you're on. Kindness works in any world. So that's what's going on here. And we'll try to get another episode out in February yet so that y'all don't feel robbed. Anyways, keep your hat on. Oh, wait. See, I know how to carry the brand. Keep your hat on. We may end up miles from you. Talk to you guys soon. Enjoy the show. Bye.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests as individuals, and do not necessarily reflect those of advertisers or sponsors. This show is intended as entertainment and commentary only. The producers strive for verisimilitude, but nothing said on this podcast should be taken as fact by the listener or viewer without performing due diligence. While generally considered safe for work by way of content, some language may be considered offensive by more sensitive viewers or listeners.
Existence, the physical universe, is basically playful. There is no necessity for it whatsoever. It isn't going anywhere. That is to say, it doesn't have some destination that it ought to arrive at.
But we're not. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Keep Your Hat On. Happy New Year.
Oh, we're almost done now, too.
Yeah,
okay.
I was going to say, what time is it? I got to go.
Yeah.
We're here 2025. the year, not the political subterfuge. I'm Andrew. That's Dr. Mark. That's Chris. Ty's okay. Apparently, I didn't quite understand what your interpretation of here was. It seemed to be leaving.
I am present, but the sun is...
You can't do anything about that with the shade technology you have, huh? No?
No, I got the little bamboo, the fine bamboo rim.
Anyways,
shade.
Happy New Year, everybody. We've been, for the past week, off and on in different little segments of Hatland, been talking about something that we're bringing to you. Look, honest to God, shit's weird. We're all very aware that things have gone in a direction that a bunch of us on this planet question.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think that we can all agree on, we, the hat we, and then we, the royal we out there, is that things ain't what they used to be, and that we are, and I honestly think this is turning into a global phenomenon. People are more disconnected than have ever been before. We are a culture based upon individuality, and that's fine and great, and you know, we built a brand on it. But we're a society of independent nodes, more so than has ever existed in modern times. And that brings some good things to the table. People are more able to express themselves in their individuality in as a myriad of ways, unlike has ever happened. But at the same time, it's brought a great deal of division into people's lives. We are now in camps, and there's been a book that happened a number of years ago, but it's kind of blown back up in the public consciousness. And it's by a gentleman, an author, an academic, and his name is Robert David Putnam. And I'll read his CV here. He's an American political scientist specializing in comparative politics, and he's the Peter and Isabel Mencken Professor of Public Policy at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government. So dude's got some cred. And I remember back when this book was published, I had heard of it, didn't read it. I did not read it. But I had a friend of mine who sent me an article on a paper that had been published in 94, I think. And it was about this idea of the fact that this individuality thing has made us completely disconnected. And in this paper, he used the example of bowling. Now, I grew up literally behind a bowling alley, and Dr. Mark is still in the land of the lanes, as we used to joke.
Dairy and bowling, yes.
Yeah,
indeed.
That's right.
You know, laugh.
Right? No, you don't laugh at bowling. You do not
bowling
laugh at the Jesus.
Go on.
The Jesus. Bowling is more popular than it has ever been. And this paper back in the mid-90s has said, back then, it's even more popular than it was then. Now, bowling is more popular than it's ever been. And yet, fewer people bowl in bowling leagues.
That's the thing.
Now, you know, when we were kids, I literally had a bowling alley in my backyard. You'd walk across the parking lot. We were at the lanes. We would always be given $1 and told to go spend the afternoon bowling when we got on our parents' nerves. But, you know, the big action was league night, right? There were all sorts of different leagues and everything. And league participation in bowling kept that bowling alley that I grew up behind busy all the way through till, I can't remember when it kind of did something different. It was also a restaurant and everything, but well into the 21st century. But yet, the statistics now are fewer people are league bowling, but more people overall are bowling. And so that leads to this gentleman's book called Bowling Alone. And that book was the basis for a number of discussions over the last 20 years. And I remember seeing Putnam on, I think it was Oprah.
Probably.
But lately, Putnam's been making the rounds again. And it's because a set of filmmakers, a couple made a documentary effectively about Putnam and about this book and about
It was
this
his former
phenomenon.
student. His former student did it, actually.
Was it? Okay, yeah, thank you that. All right.
Yeah.
And the documentary is called Join or Die. Now, of course, that is a very famous
Ben Franklin
call.
cartoon.
Exactly.
Yeah, revolutionary.
Yeah, Revolutionary War. Now, we're not going to be going down that road of don't tread on me, snowflake. But the whole thing, and by the way, there's going to be a link in the description. The documentary is currently streaming on Netflix.
Oh, it's so good.
And it's really good.
And by the way,
it's
this
really
is going
good.
to blow up this year because there are a number of screenings that are not theater screenings, but community screenings. So over the next 6 months, I would say this is probably going to take off in terms of
If we're lucky.
water coolers.
Yeah, we're not going to be the only people putting this book, this documentary, and this person in front of you. This is, as
just
Robert
the
said,
second.
this Friday the 3rd or something. But consider joining our club. Overall, I think one of the things that we're going to be doing with this, and in the here and now, why it's happening now, is of course because of this place of divisiveness that we find ourselves in. And the author's true belief that understanding this phenomena, or in short parlance, joining a club, might actually be the way to solve or at least mollify a lot of the problems that we're having in our society and culture today. We're going to come back and we're going to start with Ty talking about really the kernel of the idea that underpins this whole thing. We will do that in just a second. This is Andy. That's Ty. I can't really, it doesn't do well when I'm pointing at the screen over here. Wait, no, here, hold on. There we go. So there's Ty. That's Ty. Okay.
Ooh,
that's Dr. Mark. And that's Chris. And I'm me. And we'll be right back. This is the Narrowband Broadcast Network. This is Keep Your Hat On. Don't go anywhere.
Totally looked at the wrong camera when you said.
Did I? That's okay.
Jeez.
We're back. Ty, we're jumping over to you right away to start this. What is the primary mechanism that Putnam talks about in both the book and that gets put in front of people for the documentary? There's obviously people, groups, skins and games and stuff like that, but what does this idea of participating in a club or a group, what does it generate, or what's the theory there that it should generate?
Yeah, let me start with saying, I did read the book. I had to read the book in university. And for me, it was rough. Might not be for everybody else, but for me, it was a tough read.
You mean just because of its wording and academic kind of
It
analysis
got
of
into
things?
academia, it just is someplace.
It just dried you out.
A lot of stats.
I was
played
not
against your AD.
I was not ready to appreciate it, right? I just wasn't able to slog through it all the way. Well, I did, but it was, like I said, it was a slog. But it did soak in, and I'll get back to where it soaked in. And I didn't notice that it had soaked in until going back and thinking about this and actually preparing for this program. It was like, oh my gosh, this really did sink into me. But the main tenet here is around the term social capital. And, we don't really need to go into a big definition, because if you're going to watch that documentary, you will get a really good definition. But just to kind of sum it up, right? Social networks that have net worth can be defined as social capital, right? And in the documentary, there's a example of tools. The more related tool items you have for a task, the increased productivity you are going to be in that related task.
Boy, I proved that wrong. There's a shop full of tools over there that are just push dust. Yeah, that's exactly. All right, sorry, go on.
So, no, it's okay.
Thanks. My pain firsthand, so that's why I threw that out there.
Oh yeah. And you can expound on this and just kind of unfold it to our lives as a society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I will come back to that in just a little bit as well. But some of the benefits of this social capital, some of this stuff is actually pointed out.
By the way, before you go on, for everybody else that might be listening, and let's get a term defined here. Capital in this regard is not like Madison, Wisconsin, or Salem, Oregon. Capital in this idea, capital, is the concept of value of a currency kind of capital, a resource.
Yeah, like a resource. It's the capital of social.
Exactly.
Dun dun dun. But some of the benefits when we are practicing this social capital is there's accountability. People are less likely to cheat each other, right? Which brings out an honesty. And then there's the reciprocity of it.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. His idea holds the trust and reciprocity hold hands with each other very closely.
Oh, yeah. And the whole idea, the whole key of this whole conundrum that we're facing is about trust. And that's not too hard to see. And the trust is going to come after the reciprocity, right?
I love that Spoonerism. I'm going to call it reciprocity from now on.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. Where does...
That kind of, it was interesting to hear him use that word, because the times that I really hear that word is in game theory, right? So for those of us that don't know, game theory states that if we are going to sit across the table and play a game, I am only going to come to that table and play that game with you as long as I walk away with something of value. In other words, if I am berated and I lose every time, it's not going to be too long before I stop coming to the table.
Yeah.
That in itself is a huge thing to think about as we are talking about the societal problems that we're having right now.
Well, not only that, in game theory too, it's built in that part of your motivation, what you get out of it, might not necessarily be winning the game, but a byproduct of you losing the game, which you value more. And that often is demonstrated by adults playing games with children in order to get children to be quiet. You're going to willingly lose at Go Fish because the kid will be quiet. And I know that sounds kind of like a extreme example, but I fully believe that is at play in society and culture too.
It comes down, just like I said, you have to walk away from that game with something that's going to be
capital
value, some value.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, as he talks about the general reciprocity of, I'm going to be nice to you because you're part of this community, even though I don't know you. We're part of the same community. And then the specific, I'm going to be nice to you because you're nice to me, right? Or if you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you kind of a thing. But it also creates a safety net. I was thinking about this and all the communities, the more communities that you're in, the more network you're doing.
Yeah, and the safer you are, because if one community can't support you here, another one might support you there and be able to step up and step in times when the rest of your safety nets might be, I don't know, occupied with some other thing.
Exactly. When I'm having a hardship, I'm not sinking into a hole as fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I possibly have some help. But the case is made that social capital can equal robust democracy.
One might argue that the economy of social capital, I just coined a term, that the economy of social capital is the underpinning of a successful and long-term society.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and with a long-term successful society, you probably have a democracy.
Just a sidebar, Putnam's original research was built around, if we saw in the special, right, this was built around robust democratic systems in Italy. Mm-hmm. And he found out specifically, right, this is where this all got started, was that the only factor that measured satisfaction with local government had nothing to do with wealth or education or all the rest of these. It was club membership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, club membership.
And the reason for that we'll come back to after a while.
Not that we're trying to spoil the documentary or anything.
No, that's a
you can't spoil this thing, man. No, it's cool.
No, you really can't. You really can't, can you? I mean, because everybody's going to walk away with something, with a different takeaway and a different.
And not only that, you are surprised at every turn that this takes, and it takes more turns than you might suspect. You might think that this is just some wonkish people talking heads thing, theorizing. No, it's a real boots on the ground kind of application and understanding of these theories, and it's fascinating. And there are people in there that I suspected I might see, and there are people in this documentary that I didn't suspect that I'd see. There are a few in there that I kind of cringed at. But so too with society. I don't get along with everybody and I don't follow everybody. But I do find that the more people that are included in the discussion, the more rich and interesting the discussion is. Ty, do you have anything else on this idea of social capital before we move forward? Yeah, please.
I do actually have some more. So, as I was looking at social capital, just kind of the term, I found a Dr. Rick Mask, and he's got some pretty good qualifications.
We'll have a link in the description.
I found an article that he published, and he had an even more refined definition of social capital, which was value derived from positive connections. And I really liked that. And then I started thinking, a lot of these things we started markedly seeing a decline in the 70s. So I started looking, because I grew up in the 70s. 70s where we had neighborhoods, right? Where I could walk home alone without fear, right? Because everybody knew each other. We had corner stores or local stores rather than the chain stores. And again, knew the ownership and they knew who to call if I was being troublesome because it was a sense of community. We also had malls versus internet shopping, right?
Mm-hmm. It's pretty weird when we're praising mall culture, right?
But there was a community there, right?
Yep.
And that is at the bottom of mall rats, by the way, if you've ever watched
by the way, and thank you for bringing up mall rats, but of course, they're working on more. Kevin's back to work with mall rats. So for people in our generation, that's a very significant thing.
Yeah.
You're totally right.
There was also like, you know what? When our parents, or later on, as a young person, when I wanted to draw money out, I had to go see a teller instead of an ATM.
I had to go into a bank
and have an interaction.
Hold a conversation. Yeah.
With somebody who, generally speaking, either knew me or knew my family or especially knew my parent.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And speaking of Kevin, right, we used to have clerks. We had, you queued up in a line to buy something rather than a self-checkout.
Well, not only that, when you finally got up there with your VHS tape that you were going to watch for the 30th time, that clerk goes, there's something new in that I know you're going to love this.
Yeah. A bunch of positives about that, right?
Oh, yeah.
We also had, back as I grew up in the 70s, community police. We had police officers that lived in the community, that served a specific community. They had a beat, so to speak.
Yeah.
As opposed to now where we have police forces.
Mm-hmm.
I then, through that article, which is a really good read, found some things, and I've kind of peppered them in here. But I found Dr. Lori Santos, and she has a quote where she basically points to, the sheer amount of time we spend around other people predicts how happy we're going to be. And there's a link down here to one of her podcasts that might have come from.
By the way, interesting quote from PUTNAM, fact from PUTNAM, and that is, if you join a club, you are 50% less likely to die in the following year.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's the kind of surprising shit that suddenly pops up in this documentary.
And I found another article that we're going to post a link to that talks about loneliness has an epidemic, to your point.
And we're gonna be talking more about the loneliness epidemic in a little bit in our show.
2018 Cigna survey, and Zers, 68% of them felt like nobody really knew them. And overall loneliness, it's a real interesting look when you look over the generations. Millennials, 45% feel lonely, a majority of the time. Gen X, 45%. Boomers, 45%.
Oh.
But then you get to the greatest generation and they drop to only 38%. So
isn't that just via attrition and how many are left?
I kind of thought about that too.
You kind of got to just go with the amateurization tables and talk to your actuary friend about who's left for sample.
Yes, well, this would, by the way, that would just validate the proof, because the ones who are left over are the ones that don't feel lonely and are therefore the ones in clubs.
That are still alive.
Right, and exactly, or the ones who are still around and understand the value of, pardon the use of this, but understand the value of the old ways,
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Now, I started to wonder whether isolation and distrust were kind of a feedback loop, right? And the way that this book really sank in, and I didn't understand it, is when we have all these mass shootings, when we began to see this as an epidemic, has every other day, and everybody was shouting around gun control, I would say out loud and thought to myself, yeah, gun control is a possible avenue for that. But what we really need, before we really can pull that all back and undo that, we have to start establishing community again, back to the neighborhood communities and stuff like that. So
I do believe that it is kind of an Ouroboros kind of thing where it's eating its own tail. When you brought up that you think that it's kind of self-perpetuating, I do believe it is. It brings up a question in my mind, though, and that is, you know, back when we were building the interwebs, we had this term called the fulfillment of the promise of technology. You know, because all of us grew up reading Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke and all this, right? And, you know, this Brave New World and stuff like that.
Star Trek.
Right, exactly. By the way, Roddenberry was come up with a better place to live. That people are saying it's too woke drives me nuts. Look at the guy's CV. The idea of the promise of the fulfillment of technology, and this is really going to be my point in a minute, but it's this idea that we looked at this idea of the internet, communication, telecommunication, being able to speak to somebody around the other side of the globe instantly, that this was going to bring us together. This was going to unify us. It was going to take away the impediments to connecting with people. And so anyways, Ty, find a place to land with this.
Yeah. You know, it got me asking some questions about how do we build trust, right? And another quote that I came across was, the less time we spend talking, I mean, physically talking to one another, the less time we spend understanding each other or even ourselves. And let's face it, if we haven't defined where we stand, we'll fall for just about anything. And so the things that I'm considering is the thing to ask yourself. It's a rhetorical question, right? How much time do you spend bonding with other people, as opposed to how much time do you spend avoiding others?
Well, as a dyed-in-the-wool introvert who's only more introverted thanks to COVID, and that's going to be something that, and I was sad that didn't have a higher place in Putnam's discussion, is what, and I got to look a little bit deeper into it to see if maybe he's addressed it someplace else, what the pandemic might have done to this idea of joining a club. Because of the four of us here, you know, Dr. Mark, and we'll be getting to him in a second, but, you know, you, for as long as I've known you, which is now 30 odd years, I think it is, yeah. You know, you historically, when you were working, you know, doing the Dem beat and getting out there in Washington County, which, by the way, for all you people around the world, Washington County is now one of the reddest districts in all of Wisconsin.
The reddest, by the way.
Is it? Okay.
More than Waukesha, believe me.
Sorry, Waukesha. Yeah. But, you know, you always had this where you just like, let's go out to coffee. You'd take people with dramatically opposing views and sit down with them physically.
I've had stupidly good luck doing that, by the way, in ways that are still shocking to me, but yeah, go on.
But that's just it. This whole exploration of this idea brought that back to my head, because really it's just the club phenomena on a small scale. It's very hard to piss in somebody's coffee when they're sitting across the table from you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're going to circle around on this, I think, but
Yeah,
Ty said
absolutely.
something about, you know, the individual communication, like sitting with another person. That makes all the difference.
Yeah, that was one of the thoughts that I had during the pandemic, was a big part of these human interactions is the body language, is the minute little muscle movements that somebody makes that you consciously or subconsciously register in your brain. And the fact that we all had masks on as these toddlers, as these infants were growing up, and they weren't able to fully see our faces and what that's going to do in terms of their social growth.
Now, let's be clear. Masks were important. We were all fine. Nobody choked on a mask and everything, you know.
That's not what I'm saying at all. You know,
I understand. I'm just talking. Look, hold on. It's my job to make sure that nothing can be misinterpreted out in the public so that shit doesn't go sideways. I was not implying that you were saying that.
So, you know, my question, another follow-up question to that consideration is, you know, what I started with was what constitutes bonding? What constitutes avoidance of bonding?
Yeah, that's good.
And is social media really social at that point? Right? There's no body language. There's oftentimes no cadence. Text can be very flat and one-dimensional. And I wonder how we got to this place, and this, I know that this is going to be talked about later, but how devices, how screens have pushed us to want to be more productive and that we feel that we're too busy for the things of yesterday.
Well, I want to point out something before we kick over to Chris, and that is the word that you used that I find is really important. And this is something that Putnam has a mechanism for in his theories about this. You were using the term bonding, and he refers to two types of social capital, two primary types of social capital. One is bonding social capital, and the other is bridging social capital. And bonding social capital is just kind of what it sounds like and what you were talking about. You've got two people, you've got some very similar interests, and you sit down together and you bond over that thing, right? You bond over, or in a group of people, you bond over your love of Swedish dessert spoons, or, you know, whatever the hell it is. Now, that is the idea of, you know, you've got groups or pastimes that help you connect with people that are similar by way of interest to you. Bridging social capital is connections with people because you have some kind of similar, you know, raison d'etre, school board, PTA, stuff like that, right? But you're not in the same social circles. And so it is a bridge. We have this same need or the same interest. And, you know, I wouldn't talk to you normally because you live across town or whatever, but our kids go to school and here we are. And one of the things that we're starting to see, and this is going to tie into what Chris is talking about a little bit, and that is we kept the bonding capitals. We kept the bonding mechanisms, but because of the way we have engineered our society and culture in the modern era, we now no longer have those bridging capital opportunities, because all you got to do is get on Facebook and join the old codgers DIY shed and never have to leave your house. We're going to be back in just a second to talk about a little bit more of the actual mechanisms of groups and clubs and why they might structure themselves the way they do in just a second. This is the Narrowband Broadcast Network. I'm Andy. That's Dr. Mark. That's Ty. We're going to talk to Chris as soon as we get back. Don't go anywhere. Bye. We're back along with the hats that have already addressed us, that being Ty and me. That is Dr. Mark. And we're going over to Chris. Chris, clubs. And I think one of the things that we need to do here, we're using the term club a lot. And that almost, well, that's true a little bit. You're right. You know, the idea is written down with the word club in forward. Join or die, join a club. Why clubs are important. I agree, Mark, you're right. We haven't really. We've been talking about group. Is there, Chris, in your mind, is there a difference between a club and a group?
Yeah.
Do these distinctions make a difference in light of the theory?
I think they do. Yeah. First of all, yes, absolutely. I think there's a clear difference between a club and a group in the sense, and before the break, you're getting really close to it, right? In terms of these, with a club, you start with a foundational shared interest. And it could be anything. I spent a lot of time, actually, the last week or two looking at sort of different clubs, thinking about different clubs, thinking about what a club was versus what a group was. And a lot of it comes down to this shared foundational interest. So, for example, I'm an artist, and looking around Portland, actually, they mentioned the Meetup app in the documentary, and I downloaded that and started looking through it. And as an artist, there are drawing groups around the city. There are groups that, are get together to share their common interest in photography or WordPress. I'm a WordPress developer. All sorts of different foundational interests. And that becomes a basis so that you're no longer, when you walk through the door, you're not a complete stranger to these people, in the sense that you've got this shared thing, right? And it's a jumping off point for your conversation and for you to start building that social capital. And it takes work, and it takes involvement, and it takes participation, and you've got to show up, right? Now, a group, on the other hand, is it's this sort of alignment. It's a looser sense, this alignment of ideas. So, for example, I would use the example of, say, sports fandom. That's more of a group thing, right? Yes, you've got a shared interest in the Packers, for example, and you want to see the Packers win. But, it's not like you meet up and talk about the Packers and whatever. Maybe some people do. But there's less of that basis that I do this thing and I have this thing in common with you, and this is how I do this thing, and this is what I can show you about how I do this thing, and this is what I can learn from you about how you do this thing. And suddenly the relationships start to blossom and spill over into other aspects of our lives.
Well, and that's a measure of capital, like we were talking about with Ty, too. You are, unlike being in a club for the Packers appreciation, where you probably wouldn't get much out of it aside from camaraderie.
Yeah.
Being a member
Has
of
anybody been in a sports bar? I mean, there are, like, here in Portland, there are a group of Steelers fans that meet every weekend at the same pub. And from that comes all this other stuff.
Sure.
And all they do are watching the game together.
But primarily, you're getting fidelity and fraternity out of that. What Chris is discussing is, I have this interest, I do this thing, this is my pursuit. And getting together with other people who have that passion, you are getting knowledge, developing skills, learning insider information. So Chris,
learning about different materials, techniques, whatever it is, and so that's where I think the differentiation starts. Now, I also think about the development of social capital, and the documentary really got me thinking about this in terms of, we sort of build our relationships with the world in concentric rings, right? I've got my inner circle, and those are the people that are closest to me, that I've really brought in through various means. And then steadily you get farther out, and I have less in social capital, less trust, more at arm's length.
Your PTA members.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a common thing, but, it kind of stops there.
Right.
Until it doesn't, and maybe what happens is we're having coffee out in the lobby and drop a mention that, hey, I'm really into this thing.
I have to go to my other club. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, into that too. Why don't you come to the club with me?
And it spider webs out from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that becomes a mechanism for building these things.
But let me ask you something, though, in that, I mean, because obviously there are all sorts of different types of clubs, and, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but my dad was a lion. My dad was in a benevolent organization, in a fraternal organization. Chris, those are clubs. We often don't think of the Freemasons as a club, but they are, and they're important, and they're foundational, and honestly, they're foundational in modern America.
Mm-hmm.
Speak briefly to that dynamic of membership versus, collecting pennies that were crushed by train cars.
Sure. And, my dad was a member of the JCs, and I never really understood what that was, but God, he loved it. He was just thrilled about it.
Drinking clubs.
And I didn't.
And the Mason.
I never had any interest, any curiosity to pry into it. It was his thing, and
right.
But boy, he felt great about it. And I think what happens with those sorts of groups, is the heart of those is fellowship. It's this agreement among the members of the group that, we're coming together at the heart of it for the sake of coming together and for building those bonds of fellowship, because we know that walking through this life alone is fucking hard.
Well, and also all those member organizations have a mission. The Lions Club was blindness around the world. That was their big thing. And, you could take old eyeglasses and donate them at any of a number of different places around town, and they would be recycled. And of course, the JCs are unfortunately Knights of Columbus or things like that. Knights of Columbus was an offshoot religious organization,
Christian organization, and
Rotary.
Actually, it's so funny. Little atheist me, when I graduated eighth grade, I got a Service to Mankind award from the Knights of Columbus as I was graduating from 8th grade.
They didn't know you sold your soul.
It's like, boy, you guys have no idea what you just endorsed.
But sum up your idea, Chris, a little bit.
Well, one of the things I want to point out, though, is take the Rotary, which is mentioned in the documentary, started as two guys getting lunch every Friday. And
literally.
It was just that simple. And it's expanded out into this massive, good, productive thing.
It makes me interested to know what was the last time any of you guys just went out to lunch with a friend?
Last week?
A couple weeks ago. Yeah,
okay.
Last week,
Yes.
2 weeks ago.
I do.
Yeah.
What a bunch of losers we are.
I'm the odd man out. I haven't done that in 5 years.
Hey, Andy, when's the last time you got out of the house?
Oh, yesterday. But that wasn't shopping. That's not the same. That's not the same. No, I'm not a good sample of that. Again, with my disability. It's harder for me to get out in that regard. And that's going to bring me around to something interesting as far as technology goes. But Chris, wrap yourself up here.
Yeah. So I'd like to kind of bring it in for a landing in terms of, the participation. The bottom line with participation in clubs or groups to a similar degree is you got to put in the work. You got to show up. And one of the big observations that really sunk in with me watching the documentary was that what I've watched erode over the decades is our willingness to tend to that part of our own being, our social fitness, as it were, by accepting substitutes.
Careful, that sounds really Aryan, dude.
I build my social life around work because I don't have the time or the energy or the inclination to go put in the effort in a club. And that's fraught with problems because you got the work relationship always in the way, right? Yeah. And you can't have a more authentic interpersonal relationship with your workmates. It just because there's always that barrier, there's always that frame.
Yeah.
And so yes, I know you're headed to, I kind of know where you're headed. I think one of the really big forces that's driven us this direction is that we haven't reinforced the value of showing up and doing the work and focusing on what we get out of that. And showing up is its own reward. I mean, doing the work is its own reward.
I think that's one of the things that I find interesting about your angle, and that is it points to the fact that in order to have a successful society, if we're using the model of club and organization and group and all that stuff, being a tenant, a pillar underneath our society, that it's not going to ever be strong if people aren't willing to invest in it, as you said, invest in your pursuit of that interest in going to that club. Yes, I could sit on my ass at home and watch Netflix and documentaries, but no, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go out and I'm going to invest my time and energy in being with other people. And that, I think, is really significant. We're going to jump over now, though. Mark, as the elder hat, your father was a physician.
Hey.
I imagine in your upbringing, your family's model of living was different from ours in a number of significant ways, especially with a classical professional person as a father.
Yeah, part of that's true, but it's even more than what you would normally get, I think, because we were my parents were the people who grabbed all the orphans and brought them to the house for dinner. And so we were the house where everybody came for supper. And, I have very dramatic memories of this couple and their son. This was at the University of Chicago in the late 60s, and they got to spend their very first Thanksgiving after the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia. You might remember that little incident back in Prague Spring.
Yeah.
They spent their first Thanksgiving with us. And it was like, I would have probably been like 11, right, at the time. And it was like, that leaves scars, when you go, holy shit, we can do good things for other people. Anyway, I had that kind of feeling. But so there was a lot of socialization in those days. That just happened because there was no internet, right? You triggered a bunch of thoughts here at once. I want to go back to one thing I think Chris was saying about, or you guys, we all talking around this, the impact that all this technology has had on people actually going out. And the idea of investing, I'm going to come back to too. But I mean, there wasn't anything else to do then. You know what I mean? So the technology itself seems to breed this. One of the weird things that happened on campus since you were there, Andrew, was, so back when Andy was there in the early 90s, faculty, we didn't have the internet yet on campus. I think I did. Me.
Yeah, you did. Peterson next to you did.
And Dick Cleek, our geographer, who was actually quite famous for tracking down, he was a cultural geographer, so he actually mapped the spread of internet nodes. It was really cool stuff. Caught the Scientologists monkeying around with the early internet. Anyway, yeah, it was hilarious. They were very
we
mad.
didn't have the distraction boxes in every single office.
Well, they didn't. And so here's what happened since then is back in those days, we all used to go have lunch in the cafeteria together. We'd go watch, the students would get to, come in and sit with us and all this stuff. A few years after the internet showed up, you couldn't get people to go have lunch anymore because they said, I got to get work done. It's like, what is it you have to do?
Yeah,
and the answer was mostly deleting emails from administration that you didn't actually need to know, but you needed to read them enough to delete them.
And playing solitaire.
Eats up a lot of time, Dr. Hamilton. So, but that's part of the management strategy. So I think there's some of this is like, there's something in the tech itself, right? I mean, this is the shiny stuff. They've started to talk about, the dopamine release from
dopamine hits
from doom scrolling and stuff. Okay, humans are like shiny things. So all that's at work. The thing Chris said about investment is really interesting. And it's like, I don't know that anybody prior to the interwebs thought about like investing their time in clubs because there wasn't a choice. That's how you did that. The old bowling days. So like Andrews, it's like Wisconsin is like bowling central.
Yeah.
And beer brats and bowling. That's our 3 Bs for Wisconsin.
I don't bowl on Saturdays.
Don't bowl on Saturdays.
Wednesday night is league night.
Listen, Donnie.
Shabbos. There aren't any Jews in West Bend. I knew there was one. I knew him. It was Joel, by the way, Andy. It was Joel.
God bless our dean.
Yeah, he pretended.
Those out there that know.
Yeah,
Joel,
exactly.
don't roll.
Anyway,
on Shabbos.
Yeah, I guess you have Chinese food on Shabbos. I guess that's where I would go. Okay,
probably.
Sorry, but the investment part's really interesting, and I got to thinking about this a lot, and so I was mentioning earlier before we went to recording about my latest Motley cow. I got back.
Link in the description.
Yeah, this is about ukuleles can save democracy, and it holds
hands.
Synchronicity with Andy said we should talk about Putnam. Have you seen the latest? And I did, and it was like awesome.
Well, yeah, because before that, Mark got back to me saying, "Hey, I think I figured this out." And
yeah, by the way, should I just throw that on the table right away?
I was just going to say, we might as well get to that point because that's kind of
Let me just do
where
that.
this all coalesced together.
Yeah, let me just jump to this because we don't want to bury the lead here.
We're an hour in. The lead's dead and buried.
The lead is dead. The lead is floating off.
There was a lead?
Down a stream in a South American town nobody remembers the name of.
That's a deep cut.
Here's the lead. Okay, so here's the lead. So I'll just give you the baseline narrative setup for this, which was that I was at this ukulele festival. One of the long-term members, Derek, my buddy Derek, who's at Purdue, by the way, he's a mechanical engineer. We're sitting around talking, getting our coffee on in the morning, and we're talking about all the new people who'd showed up for this thing. And people who go to ukulele festivals routinely demonstrate this kind of over-the-top joy and relief, and like they can't believe how great it is. And it's like, we've seen this a lot. So we go, welcome. But I've spent a lot of time talking to those people. And so Derek and I were talking about what's the cause of this joy? And Derek jumped right to it. He went, community. Community. It's this sense of community. And this triggered this cascade in my head. And here's the punchline. That took me back to community organizing school. Some of us went through Camp Obama back in 2008, and we all got inculcated with the community organizing theories of this Marshall Gantz, who's at Harvard now.
Mm-hmm.
I went and took he had his course online from MIT, which I took afterwards. It was a revelation. But so there's a lot of really cool things about how you knock on doors with people who really want to kill you, which was very common in Washington County, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, it wasn't funny, but it was fascinating. Anyway,
so many 30-odd sixes in Washington County.
Wasn't Getz also kind of the cornerstone of Wellstone action?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Wellstone was in on this stuff. See, and it's important. Here's the deal. Obama internalized all these community organizing principles when he was still doing community organizing.
Yeah, because for our listeners and watchers that might not know, that's where he cut his teeth.
That's what he did. Yeah.
Was community organizing in Chicago.
And that's why, and it's like, people forgot this, and it was deliberately forgotten. But that's how Obama got elected president. It had nothing to do with the Democratic Party. He went way the hell around. It's supposed to be Hillary, man, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He went way around the Democratic Party. He showed up, and who's this guy? Mm-hmm. His community out-organized him. Okay, blah, 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 blah. There's a core principle in community organizing, and I have driven my colleagues and stuff berserk with this for like decades now, because it doesn't make any sense.
You're not going to say that again, are you?
I am. When you do strategic planning and stuff like this, and this is especially bad with academics. And here's the mantra that I pulled out of Gantz that I learned. You can't organize around a good idea. And you have to organize around something people are passionate about. You get this, guys? Okay. And so, and the thing that I remember learning this, and I just cracked up for like 20 minutes. I could hardly contain myself, because when you live around academics, our whole job is to come up with great ideas. We get like positive, that's a great idea. Yeah, Derek, that's right.
Now,
do that.
Now go take a sabbatical and write that idea down and
Yeah,
publish
it's
it.
great.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But here's the deal.
Suck
And we've all
the
done
life
this
right out of the good idea.
If you've served on any committees, what you know is you can come up with a million good ideas that nobody gives a damn about, right? That's the thing. The trick is you have to find something people are passionate about. And so, for instance, this is, is playing the ukulele a good idea? And I'm going to say, yes, damn it. But that's not why people went to Nashville, Indiana in the middle of winter to play ukulele. 300 people showed up to play ukuleles in Nashville, Indiana. That's not because it was a good idea. That's because there's this, if you play a musical instrument, right, or you're in with a bunch of people. When I was doing martial arts, for instance, we'd have these seminars where 100 people would show up in like Aurora, Illinois for no damn reason except to get beat on for a couple of days. It's like,
that's all that happens in Aurora, Illinois, by the way.
That's about what there is to do there. Hi, Dave Carr, if you're out there. Dave's awesome, by the way. He's up to 6th degree black belt now. Anyway, okay. So, but this triggered something about this latest election cycle. And this gets to our club. Maybe we can talk about the difference in clubs and tribes. What triggered me was, and this is like plain as the nose on your face, I can't unsee this now. The Democrats have built their party around good ideas and not around passions. And our current MAGA head GOPs have built their entire thing around no good ideas whatsoever, but all around passions. And you can argue, and I would, that they're all the wrong passions, right? Truth, justice, the American way, I don't see those. I see hatred, resentment, anger, fear, animosity, and the joy of being a bully who beats up second graders when you're on the playground. That's what I'm seeing. But you know what? That stuff works great, and it's worked fabulously. And we can also talk about the difference between facts and narratives. And narratives will always trump the facts.
Yeah, word's ruined for me now.
Totally. But so there you go.
Got this. Let me ask a clarifying point here. So now what you're saying is that this idea that you can't organize around a good idea, that's an intellectual appeal. You can organize around a passion, which is an emotional appeal.
You have to motivate people with their hearts and not with their heads. To me, the other irony, if I will interject a little piece of intellectual nerdism here, Aristotle had this, thank you, Ty. Aristotle had this figured out perfectly well in 300 BC, which is that what motivates ethical action is not your intellect, but your desires and your emotions and your appetites. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's important that kids learn to like the right things.
You know what?
That's one of the reasons.
I learned that in class.
Dude, awesome.
I had class the other night, and I learned that. Great
But
professor.
it's like, when you think about it, it violates our sense of why people do things, right? It's like, well, you have a good idea, and then you'll act on it. It's like, nope. It's all
this whole thing, for me, it goes back to this idea that we often hear from spiritual teachers in Buddhist traditions that say, you can't think your way into nirvana.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't work
like
that.
I
wonder.
To act on the basis of these intellectual ideas. And that's really the core here, is that action comes out of our motivations, and that stuff is built out of our emotions and passions and not out of our intellect. There you go. And so, one last detail, and then I'll just break this down one last thing, Chris, for the club versus tribe. This is one of Putnam's main points, is that in clubs, and this is why they seem to foster strong democratic systems and institutions. In clubs, you have all sorts of people who have completely different political ideas, and you get along with them anyway. Mm-hmm. And in tribes, everybody
you have to in order to get the benefit of the club. You either decide to not argue about it and participate in the club, or you don't go to the club.
We say ukuleles
and that's the
are
sign
more
of the
important
healthy
than
club
politics.
is that it maintains its focus.
Chris.
Right. So the tribe, however, there's no disagreement in the tribe. That's what makes it a tribe.
What do you
as
think,
opposed to a club?
You think the primary difference is, because now we get this new term tribe? What do you think the primary difference is between a club, an organization, and then this concept of tribe? Because I personally think that the idea of tribe is super important, and it underpins a lot of this.
Yeah, we're using it casually here too, because I think
We
this
sort
probably
of are.
holds
We're not
around the
using
edge
it
of the
academically.
definition.
You're right.
But right for our conversation here, there seems one of the things that Putnam makes the case, which I think is like right on, is there's something passionate that motivates your participation in these clubs that can override differences of opinions. And what you have to learn then is how to manage without those differences, manage those differences. When I was a kid, you'd go to the PTA meetings. Every parent went to the PTA meetings in those days. And there were all sorts of people with different ideas, but everybody was still civil to each other because they knew there was a benefit in not being a jerk, right? But I think, anyway, there you go.
You got something out of that civility.
One of the things you get is a stable democratic institutions, right? That's one of the things you get.
Yeah.
And so to Chris's point, the tribe tends to mean like you limit disagreements like that. And they're eschewed, I guess, right? Okay, I'm done. That's all I got.
Big light bulb moment for me in that documentary. A lot of this documentary, by the way, is things that you already knew, but you may not have really considered, or you may have forgotten.
I would agree. Or that you let it be something amorphous and or kind of up on the wall academic.
It's just peripheral.
And then suddenly, because this documentary is full of light bulb moments, because you suddenly see that you identify where it's been happening in your life, in your own personal experience, and you go, damn, that it was happening right there.
But one of those light bulb moments for me was just what Dr. Mark was talking about, is that, you get together over this common cause, and all of a sudden you're not talking politics. You're not even considering that other person's politics. You're just building trust within
when you're doing it right, when you are allowing yourself to really go into the club experience, you're right. That doesn't matter. Where I'm going with this as we wrap up here, I think the semantic difference between group, club, organization, and tribe, while they might not seem important, I think they really are. Groups can be accidental. Clubs are on purpose. Organizations, by definition, have a hierarchical structure to them. But the word tribe here I find fascinating, because the other three things that I just mentioned are kind of volitional. You don't have to join a club.
That's true.
But the difference of a tribe is that
that's interesting, isn't
being a member of a tribe means your survival. And that's why one of the things that I see happening in this differentiation of our society and the stepping away from seeing social capital as having some value is that we have become tribal. Now, tribes are an important part of my psyche and my psychic architecture from study of shamanic practice and the old ways, the old religions, the old spirituality. Tribe is important because tribe gives you so many things that also happen in society and culture, ritualistic initiations into different stages of life and a bunch of other things. But what's really significant for me is you can take all that out of a tribe and still call it a tribe. And then it becomes dangerous, because if you look at your participation in a group as a mechanism of survival, then everything's different. And I believe that is kind of what started to happen for us politically and sociopolitically. We don't look at these as ideologies. We don't look at politics or anything like this as an ideology. We look at it as survival of the fittest and who deserves to be left standing. One of the things that Putnam, when I brought up the idea of bonding social capital and bridging social capital, one of the things that he was very clear about was that one is very easy and one is very hard. Bonding social capital is easy. All it takes is for you to have an interest that somebody else has. Yeah, I really like Honda CRXs, man. Let's get together and look at each other's cars. Boom, there you go. It's a bonding experience. Hand me a bud, right?
Yeah.
Bridging social capital, however, is much stronger, much more powerful, but it's much harder because, as we all just kind of said, you kind of got to be willing to set something aside. When you're in a group, that's not that hard to do. When you're in a tribe and you set something aside, you're effectively setting your identity aside and becoming very vulnerable. And we don't like doing that anymore because we now live in an age where everything is curtailed to the individual experience. From the media that you consume, the news you get, who you see, who you talk to. And that's really due to the internet.
Yeah, it's
all
an echo chamber, isn't it?
Well, echo chamber is one term. I like to look at it, I like to define it as a silo. And I use the term silo because it reinforces this idea that we've tossed out here today as well. And this idea of this epidemic of loneliness. And earlier I had mentioned, I was a very early adopter to computers and the interweb. I had one of the first 10,000 FidoNet addresses ever. And I mean, Mark, I'm pretty sure you were in the first 10K as well, because you and I were FidoNetting about the same time. You were a generation ahead of me, but we were both banging away on K-Pro computers. Yeah, the good old days. Yeah, it was
What
a
a great
different
box
time.
that was.
It was a different time. But this idea that, and I mean, honestly, if you put it on a graph, if you plot this phenomena that we're all talking about with the decline of club participation, you know, one of the, by the way, what a horrifying statistic that Putnam dropped on me in a different interview. More people bowl than vote in this country.
Wasn't that just like a
That just
mind blower?
felt like an ice pick to my forehead. My God. But really, the rise of the internet and the rise of the internet heralded this rise of individual interests. You could go these rabbit holes, right? You could go so deep. Everything is individualized for you. Every single thing. You know, jokingly, I could say, I blame the iPod, you know, because we didn't have to listen to radio anymore. You didn't have to sit through the song that you didn't like to get to the song that you did like. But what this whole thing, we've got all this individualization. We're all in our different silos. And then this idea that I have now, which, and I'm sure some wonk has called it something else, but I call it toxic anonymity. You can get all your dopamine hits for all your passions, all your interests delivered to you concisely when you want, any time of day. You don't have to invest anything but money. You only have to have, you really only need the smallest of pieces of technology, and every single thing that you want is curated for your specific interests. You don't have to get out of your fucking pajamas, and there's no need for the messiness of personal interactions.
What do you think about Ludlam's theory that it all started with television?
Well, I think that there's something to that. Putnam, I think he's using that as a stepping off point because he's an older gentleman.
Ageism. Here we go.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Let's bring the hammer.
He's an older gentleman, and I think that that's for him when he felt the shift. Being that I'm not that age, I don't get the same thing. And the reason why is because when you and me and Chris were kids, television, and I'm sorry, we were well past Howdy Doody at that point, right? Television was still a socially bonding experience.
Yes, only 3 channels, right?
Exactly. Well, 4 if you got the one where
UHF.
You had
the UHF.
Exactly. Yep. Stand weird and mom had to be in the doorway. But no, we watched it as a family. And then you couldn't wait to get to school the next day to talk about Welcome Back,
what
Kotter.
happened.
Right. Who shot JR? And he finally did get around to that. And that actually is made mention more in his interview that I'll link below from Daily Show with Jordan Klepper, where he talks about, and I'll actually, there's a fantastic quote from a art piece that I have from the guru of all 4 of us here on Keep Your Hat On, and that is Kurt Vonnegut, where he's just like, you don't need friends because your friends are on TV and they're better looking than you and they have more interesting lives than you do. But yeah, when we were kids, it was still a socially bonding thing. My thing for me is when the internet happened and you didn't have to get up and leave and invest anything in it. That's when everything started to get more lonely feeling, which is contrapuntal to the ethos that people like me, when, you know, I started developing web pages back in college in '90, I started developing web pages before there were web browsers. You know,
basically you're as old as dirt.
Well, it's digital dirt.
That was back in dinosaurs, right?
Right, exactly.
True.
But it really, that's the line for me.
We had such a different vision.
And that's just it. We had the vision that we were bringing people together. This is going to be bridging all these chasms that keep us as tribes. You're going to bring us all together.
Along these lines, what I had a thought of was, you know, they call our generation latchkey kids, right? Mm-hmm. The whole reason that we could just go home, put the key into the door, and go watch television until the parents got home was because there was social capital. I could go to the next door neighbor's house. I had somebody to call, right?
Or you know that
Something went
your mom
sideways.
knew, your mom knew that if you were trying to pull some shit, your neighbor Janice would catch you, or at least hear through the wall, and right? And so those mechanisms were there. What I find both positive and negative about something that Putnam brings up. Now, number one, in this last week of exploring this, I've become kind of a fan of his theory. I mean, there's no argument that where we are as a society, let alone race, but I think this is probably a global phenomenon to one degree or another. The good part is that I do believe that if we start remedying some of this isolation, this voluntary isolation, and I don't necessarily know that it's so voluntary anymore. I think these things are constructed and engineered from the ground up to isolate us, to keep us isolated, because engagement, man, engagement.
Attention
The
economy.
corporations need us to be distracted by this, so we're not distracted by anything else. But
one of the arguments that
I think that it could get better if more of us invest our time and energy in getting out back into the world. Unfortunately, I think, though, that he is giving a little bit too much credence to this idea that it'll solve a lot of the ills. Here's the thing. Again, I grew up with a dad, the Lions. Everybody in my town knew everybody else. When I broke my neck as a kid, 17,000 people knew it. And that, 17,000 sounds like a large number. It's not a big town. Okay. But here's the thing. I discovered going to Lions Club functions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. There was social capital. You could count on your brother Lion to come help you out. Okay. I mean it. My dad fixed more electrical problems for more people in our town with no money exchanging hands. And when our plumbing went to hell, our neighbor down the street, who was a fellow Lion, came down, got the thing fixed. But here's some other things that we learned from being in a group, from joining a club. We knew who was a casual racist, who was a formal racist, who hated the Jews, who had a token black friend. There was a lot of interesting information that kind of bubbled under the surface of a club, of an organization. There were still factions inside those groups. And what Putnam argues is that a club, or participation in a club, helps get you past that. I'm not disagreeing with that entirely, but I'm saying that, he was just like, look, I live in a small town in the Northeast, and I know my neighbors and they know me, partly because I'm an old guy, and when it snows, I don't care about politics. I just need somebody to come over and dig me out. And that's true. And as a disabled person, I lean on my friends and some of my neighbors at times to help me through those things as well.
I think
we also live in a time now where Nazis are back. Fascism is real. And I have a personal problem with wanting to giving a shit about whether or not my fascist neighbor gets shoveled out or not. And it kind of does come down to, do you want things to get better? Then we can't be so unilateral and shrill. We need to give people paths back into culture and society.
Well, and this hits to a point that you...
Mark, I'm not going to forget you. Sorry.
Okay. That you put in my head when you raised the issue of, this curated experience that's uniquely tailored to us and to our wants and what we want to see and what we want to hear and what we want to think about. How can anybody else in the real world live up to our newly developed expectations of information inflow?
Right.
Because interacting with people is messy and it's dirty and it's good. And that's what we should be reaching for.
And it can happen on your timeline and you can't hit pause. And it's ugly. It's a shit fight. It's complicated. It makes you feel uncomfortable at times. And it's possibly, as Putnam says, it might be the solution to our problem. But you got to be okay. There's no room for Nuremberg here. Mark, what were you saying before I stomped on you?
Yeah, I
Sorry.
was just going to say, we have to be careful about this because what Putnam's, he was too good a scientist to just go, here's what we need to do. What he was saying all along was like, here's what I found, right?
Right.
And in the past, there's a correlation between club membership and democratic societies, and this is probably the reason. And it's like the stuff I was bringing up before about, the reason about not organizing around a good idea, but about passions. Well, that's exactly how fascism made it, right? Because it's like, if Hitler just simply said, it's like, oh, I have an idea, let's do this stuff. Everybody would have gone, absolutely not. And every time Bernie Sanders opens his mouth, my experience is that about 99% of what he says, every conservative would agree with if they didn't know it was him. Do you know what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
like, should we fix the schools? Should we make sure there's enough of a social safety net? So we make sure people have jobs? Should we try to empower people so that they can work and make their own? It's like, yeah, they love all that stuff. But you see, it's not tribal. It's not. It doesn't ping the dopamine reflex in their brains the way marching in goose step and beating up kids does. That's all I was going to say about that.
No, and thank you for clarifying it. As we wrap up, one of the things I want to point out, and I don't know if you guys know this, again, we all know that this book that now is suddenly on everybody's list again, it's like 25 years old. It came out in like 2001.
Like this
it was
thick.
based on a paper from 95, right?
Yeah.
But one of the really interesting things for me is that, again, this is on people's must-read list today because people like AOC and people like Steve Bannon.
Ironically.
And that's just it.
But
There's
it
no
speaks to
irony.
this,
There's no
right?
irony about it.
Yeah.
Bannon used this as a tool. He went, you know what? But what he did is he took from it what would serve his purpose. I have a goal, and that is to muster people. Well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean on bonding social capital, and we'll just ignore bridging social capital because that's just going to dilute everything. That's not pure. But AOC is, on the other hand, trained like you, Mark, in an Obama era of organization. And this idea, we're dealing with this in real time now again. Putnam's got another book out that actually came out, I think 2 years ago, that I want to read now.
To get it. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
on my list.
Because, and I'm trying to remember, I'm sorry, I'll put the name of it down in the link description, but it's effectively what he's saying, and this kind of holds hands with what you just said, Mark, in that he's a good enough scientist that he didn't give you a solution to didn't give you a solution to a problem that may or may not be a problem. He was just exploring a concept. But his latest book is pretty much him saying, and here's the solution. It's that we were great once and we rushed down to a nadir, but we can be great again. And that is what his next book is about, that I'm going to be getting.
Yeah, is that he is now going to talk about the inclining side of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how can we build ourselves back up?
How did that happen before? I don't think he's giving any answers. He's just saying, here's what's
no,
on the
because
other
he's
side.
actually, and I neglected to bring this up, he's saying that this is similar to where we were at the turn of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm,
right.
That the transition from, it was particularly in America, Reconstruction and the Industrial Revolution, Victorian times where we were very, very, very segmented. We were incredibly class structured, even, as much or more as we are now. But he was just like, we suddenly, after the turn of the century, started becoming more connected, more socially invested. And we can probably do that again, but we can only do so by looking at how it happened in the past. This is, I think, officially our longest show. But I think that we can write that up to, gathering around a good idea. But I think that's because
having passion.
That's something that we all got really energized and motivated by. We suddenly had light bulbs go off because of this documentary in a number of different ways in each of our different camps, but all at the same time. And I find that that's very interesting because that just speaks to the ubiquity and the power of this idea. And the fact that we all immediately upon watching this documentary started seeing it all over the place. And as far as social engineering goes, I find that phenomena always really interesting, and I find it telling because it means that it's probably right. Anyways, we're going to let you go. Thank you for sharing the better part of an hour and a half with us. You know, gosh, do all the like, click, subscribe thing. We don't even say that anymore because we don't care. To all 7 of you, 5 of which I think are in India still. No, we thank you all very much. Thank you to our supporters. Thank you to Liam and my cousin Michelle, who is still listening, and our buddy Jason and his partner. Stay strong, battling cancer, and everybody else. But until next time, everybody, I'm Andy. That's Dr. Mark. That's Chris. That's Ty. It's 2025, and we got to figure out a way to stay connected, or moreover, reconnect. Watch the documentary. We think that you'll probably find it really interesting.
And
but until next time,
shut down all the screens, and get out the front door, and go touch some grass.
Touch some grass.
But until next time, everybody, keep your hat on because it's cold outside, baby. Although
Did he just look at that, eh? Look at that.
We don't say that anymore. It's an inappropriate song, but we may end up miles from here. Take it easy, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Tick, 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 boom.